AAUW, the Women's Resource Center of Winona, and the Winona State University American Democracy Project. We are pleased to welcome those of you in our live audience and also citizens who might be watching at home. We would like to thank the City of Winona for allowing us to hold this educational forum in the Council chambers. For those of you watching at home, we do have a call-in phone number where you can provide questions for the panel. That call-in phone number is 457-8280. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan volunteer organization at a local, state, and national level to encourage citizens to participate in government. While we as a league do study issues and take stands, we do not endorse or support political parties, candidates, or tell voters how to answer referendum questions. This forum is intended to provide the voters with information so that they can make educated choices on the ballot. The views expressed in this educational forum are those of the candidates. We do encourage our members as individuals as we encourage each of you to get involved in your community. Our timekeeper this evening is Mary Morgan. I'm going to go over just a few of the League of Women Voters Educational Forum ground rules. Copies of these rules have been provided to the candidates, and they're also available to the public this evening. I will briefly go over just a few of them, like I said. The audience is expected to be courteous to the candidates and very good listeners. This is a live TV broadcast. The audience is asked not to express support or concern during the forum and to hold their applause until the end. We would also like to remind everybody to please turn off their cell phones and pagers. Pictures and videotaping is not authorized by the League of Women Voters. This forum is being taped, and it may not be edited and must be broadcast in its entirety and according to all FCC regulations. The candidates may not use this educational forum as video in their ads or literature. During the forum, we ask that the audience present and our TV listeners write down questions or call them in. Again, that number is 457-8280. The League of Women Voters and co-sponsors will sort the questions for the moderator, and the moderator will ask the questions. The League of Women Voters will determine the questions to be asked and attempts in all good faith to make all areas covered of interest expressed by those in our audience. The candidates will not know the questions in advance. Questions that are hostile, partisan, embarrassing, inappropriate, or of personal nature will not be asked. Questions on similar topics may be grouped. All questions then become the property of the League of Women Voters. Candidates will strictly observe the time limits on their responses. The timekeeper will hold up cards to indicate that time is about to expire. Once the stop card is displayed, candidates will need to finish at the end of their sentence. Opening statements are 2 minutes. Questions each have 1 minute response time, and the closing statement will be 1 minute. The candidates with us this evening tonight are running for the Minnesota Legislature House District 28A, Lene Hahn and Jean Pulowski. And with us tonight from the Minnesota Legislature House District 21B is Steve Dryskowski, and at this time Matt Schneider is not here. However, we hope that he'll be able to join us, and when he does, we will review the questions that were previously asked and allow Mr. Dryskowski and Mr. Schneider a chance. Candidates have agreed to allow me to call them by their first names. We would like to begin with the opening statements, and again, we are just going to be allowing the District 28A to do the 2-minute opening statements in hopes that we'll be able to come back and do opening statements here later. We're going to begin with Lene. Lene, you have 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. For those who don't know me, my name is Lene Hahn. I'm a lifelong resident of Southeast Minnesota. I was born in Chatfield, Minnesota, raised in Goodhue, and I've been here in Winona for the past 4 years. I don't plan on leaving anytime soon either. I am currently a student at Winona State University, and studying business administration with a minor in political science. I've been involved in the community here for the past few years, and when approached by several others in the community if I would run, I took some time to think, pray, and speak to those close family and friends. I've been involved in politics since I was 12, so when the opportunity came, it wasn't hard to say yes. Seeing how our business environment has become hostile, and being a student and experiencing our high tuition rates are just a few things that made me want to run. I hope to continue to work to make Minnesota a better place to live, and throughout the night I hope to continue to work and speak towards how I'll just do that.
Thank you. Jean, you have 2 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. I want to thank the League of Women Voters. As a past president of the Winona League of Women Voters, I know how much work goes into these and how much they are appreciated. So thank you again for doing it, and AAUW and the other groups that are participating tonight. It's good to be here tonight and see that Minnesota is working again. Last week we got one of the best unemployment numbers since before the recession, 4.1% unemployed. This is the 5th lowest in the nation. We have over 170,000 jobs created since 2011. We outstrip all 50 states except for one, North Dakota. And when I say Minnesota's working again, we have made record investments in human capital. And some of that human capital is here today. For the first time in the history of this state, we have froze tuition at the undergraduate level for 2 years in the Minsky system in the University of Minnesota, and we are poised to continue that freeze and perhaps even reduce tuition in 2015. We are also making a record investment at the other end of the educational spectrum. We have paid for all-day kindergarten in every district in this state for the first time in the history of this state. So no kindergartner is going to have their kindergarten paid for by a grandparent, a parent, or a relative. This is the 21st century. All-day kindergarten is part of that education. And finally, we did some things, and I know there are people here today who are employed or work with the disability community. We gave a 5% raise to every employee who works in our disability community. This means home and community options, DAC, ORC. They had no raise over the Great Recession, about 8 years. We know that that community is a community that's very fragile, and we like long-term care for them, and we want to make sure that the turnover is as small as possible. So we have made record investments. Minnesota's working again, and I was glad to be part of it.
Thank you, Jean. And again, we do have a policy with the League of Women Voters that if there is a race with more than one candidate, we do require that both of them be here to participate in the actual forum and question answer session. So I apologize. Oh, do we have a?
There he is.
Oh, all I had to do was ring that up. Please have a seat. Thank you, Matt. So with that being said, we can move on to our opening statements for the District 21B. And we'll start with Steve. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Bree, and thank you to the League of League of Women Voters, and to those who have taken the time out to come tonight to see democracy in action. My name is Steve Driskowski. I grew up actually on a family farm across the river from here in Bluff Siding. My youngest brother and dad still run the farm today, and once in a while I find my way back there for a little bit of physical therapy. And that was supposed to be funny, but I guess I failed on that joke. But my background is agriculture. Growing up on a farm, I pursued and obtained both a bachelor's and master's degree in agriculture. And so my strengths really are the areas of agriculture, the outdoors, and certainly I have a strong interest in fiscal matters as well. My wife and Laura and I currently live at Mazeppa, and we've been there for about 5 years. I serve in the House on the Tax Committee, the Government Operations Committee, the Judiciary Committee. In the past 2 years, we have seen unprecedented growth in the size and breadth of state government. Has grown a full $9.4 billion in all funds spending, 15% increase in spending, the largest spending increase in the history of the state of Minnesota, funded by taxes on workers, on smokers, on farmers, and a variety of other people throughout our great state who are paying for this excessive growth in government. We have seen businesses leaving our state in record numbers. I'm concerned about the direction we're going. The growth we've seen in jobs has been largely funded or largely fueled by growth in government jobs. We need to strengthen the private sector and respect the people again. And so I look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you, Bree.
Thanks, Steve. And now, Matt, you have 2 minutes for your opening statement.
Mark.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Thank you.
Well, thank you, folks, for inviting me. I am a farmer. I was stranded in a combine, but I'm here. I had to choose between coming dressed as a farmer or running home quick. And I chose the shower. Wisely, I think. I've farmed my whole life. I've been a 2-term director of the Chamber of Commerce in Plainview. I know what business is like going on Main Street. Right now, because of big oil's pressure on our ethanol programs, we're operating at deficits on the farm. Insurance is a major issue on the farm. Personally, with just a 300-acre operation, I pay nearly $40,000 in insurance. That's before I buy any equipment, buy any seed, fertilizer, land payments. It's outrageous. Insurance goes up 10% every year. It doesn't matter what we do. The Affordable Care Act and MNsure, I stand 100% behind the Catholic Conference and all the work they've done to insure 450,000 people. Sure, it's a beginning. The first time for anything is never perfect. We'll tweak it. We'll get it right. We've had social medicine since Ronald Reagan. It's called the emergency room. No one can be turned down. Instead of a $200 doctor bill, the taxpayer gets a $2,000 bill just for a common cold or the flu. Now with Ebola on the edge of the world, what are we going to do? Everybody's up in arms. Let's spend some money. Let's stop this. Hazmat suits, our nurses don't have any. We have one of the largest East African populations in the entire country, right here in the Twin Cities area. We need to prepare for what the future brings, and tax cuts, I'm all in favor of, but let's have some smart spending, folks. Thank you.
Thank you for your opening statements, all of you. Now we're going to begin with our first question, and we're going to start that question with Jean, and then we'll move around so everybody gets a turn to start. All right, the first question is, what are your 3 top priorities for state budget funding if the state forecast has increased to allow additional funds for state programs?
We would continue right now on the track that we have been on. We already have a proposal to freeze tuition. That freeze we did for the last 2 years. We want to continue it into 2015 and 2016. Now, the question is a little bit flawed. I don't see anywhere near the amount of money we had in 2013 or 2014 in the state budget. You're going to look at a fraction of the amount. So they're going to be very frugal spending. So I'd answer the question this way. I'm already poised in January to take a look at what we invested in 2013 and 2014 in higher ed. If there is any unspent money in any of those accounts, I want that money immediately recycled in 2015 back into tuition so that that would go to offset any type of a tuition increase, hopefully a freeze, and perhaps even a decrease. I think we have to review what we did in 13 and 14, and we have to ensure that no new tax money is going to come out of the 2015 session, so we have to work with what we have.
Thank you, Jean. Steve, same question.
Well, Bree, 5 of the last 7 months have actually shown deficits in each of the 5 of the last 7 months have shown deficits in terms of revenue. Revenues come in at below projected levels. And so the question is, what are we going to look like in terms of the balance for the budget? We'll know that at the end of November, probably about December 1st, when the November forecast comes out. But we just got through a 2-year period where Minnesotans have had their socks taxed off of them. It's time for us to begin to give some of that money back, starting with the taxes that we've placed on our farmers and our businesses in this state. I'd repeal the statewide tax that was placed on property in the state that all of our property owners in the state are suffering under. I would also look at, again, the statewide business property tax that is holding back business growth in this state.
Thank you. Mark, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Bree. I told Governor Dayton 4 years ago, we did a campaign stop together, that the farm economy was going to pull the state out of the deficits that Plenty have. Plenty stole money from the schools, stole money from the local government aid. Cities and counties, they can't make up that difference. When they're counting on money and they're short, they're short. They can't pass the buck to anyone else. Now the farmers, we're going to be operating in the red. So frugal spending is the rule of the day. Yes, we caught up on some behind bills that the state had, but it was during good times on the farm. The farm economy will go with the state economy. Right now, it's in trouble. $2 corn is not break even. $30 rent is all these prices can afford a farmer to pay, is $30 rent. I have 80-year-old farmers dependent on me to pay $250. Thank you.
Thank you. Lene?
Yeah, well, top 3 priorities for if we should see a spending and a surplus within the budget, I think, would be making sure that money gets back into the people's hands. It was theirs to begin with, and it belongs back to them, whether that's through tax breaks or going back into different funds in education and or transportation and making sure our infrastructure is stronger than it needs to be.
Thank you. Now, I just wanted to remind everybody, if you need a question stated, please feel free to ask me when I get to you. The next question, we'll start with Steve. How would you use your office to aid local government?
Well, I would, as I have numerous times, I would work with local governments to identify a list of the many onerous and expensive mandates that the state legislature has unnecessarily placed on local units of government, which has increased their cost of operation, and in turn they have been forced to raise property taxes in order to pay for those statewide mandates on local governments, whether you're talking about schools or cities or counties. We need to remove many mandates. I had a bill in 2011 that would have repealed 50 different mandates to local units of government to free up their ability to operate within the budget they had, and had we actually repealed all of those, many local units of government would have been able to reduce property taxes. That's the direction I'd like to see us go, and the direction I'll continue to work.
Mark?
Thanks, Bree. There's 2 types of spending. Spending we can't afford and spending we can't afford not to do. And I think we can all sum that up in our own families, what we can afford not to spend money on. There's items we need. We need to listen to the cities and the counties, and we need to get their ducks in a row, and we are their representative, and we take our marching orders from the counties and the cities that are within our district. And Steve summed it up pretty well. I don't disagree with a lot what he said.
All right. Lene?
Thank you, Bree. I think one of the things I would use in my office is to make sure that we're able to give local government control to them when it's appropriate and when it should be within their hands. Sometimes we get too handsy up in the state to get and take things and use it to our own power when really that control should be down to the local government. And so I think I would work in my office to make sure that government control isn't being misused in the wrong places, instead going back to the local governments.
Thank you. Jean?
We worked with the local units of government this year in 2014 in redefining Chapter 12A and 12B, the disaster legislation. For the first time since 2007, there was not a special session this year as the result of a disaster being declared in Minnesota. 40 counties were declared to be a disaster. We didn't need one because we worked with them with creating a mechanism now where we can now kickstart all the aid we need, and then we can have accurate numbers in 2015. Secondly, by investing in local government aid. Winona is a classic example. You're seeing 12 blocks of streets in this town being totally resurfaced, curb to curb, right down to the sewers, as a result of our investments in local government aid and what they need. And finally, the bridge. The bridge that's coming in here will ensure that both the city and the county, this is a regional center, have a major transportation artery open. Even if one of them would go down, we'd still have 2 lanes open. Those are examples of what we need to continue to do, working with our local units of government.
Thank you, Jean. And I just want to remind all the candidates to speak up, and I clearly didn't have my microphone on either, so speak really clear into the microphone for everybody. Next question, Mark, we'll start with you. In 2008, the Clean Water Amendment was passed in Minnesota. How do you see the impact of this amendment on our local soil and water resources?
Well, as a steward of the soil, for 14 years I've been practicing no-till farming. An acre of corn can take nearly 8,000 pounds of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. You realize we're burning a coal train and an oil train to the moon and back. This is not sustainable. The problem is not enough oil. The problem is we have too much oil. It's time to move on. BP has a slogan, Beyond Petroleum. But BP has more cash flow than the country of Sweden, and you don't see them moving beyond petroleum. As a farmer, big oil has treated us like the Taliban, and I don't like it. We're trying to get a blend, a little higher blend in our fuel. We did away with a government program by going 10% ethanol. We should be 15% stat right now to stabilize this farm market. We've had a couple good years, but rents went up, every input went up, and right now it's a burden on the crop farmers in Minnesota.
Thank you. Lene?
Thank you, Bree. I'm not going to lie, I don't know what the 2008 bill includes, but I would hope to work with the Soil and Water Conservative and make sure that we're doing the best we can with them and being educated with them and how is it going to affect them and hearing their thoughts on it.
Thank you. Jean?
The law was created in part because of the very karst topography of this area. Anything we put on the ground literally goes into the water supply. We've seen it now with the discussion on silica sand or frac sand and the impact that that has had on both the land, the air, and the water. So legislation like that is needed, particularly in southeastern Minnesota, if you are going to have clean water and if we are going to preserve the natural resources of this area.
Thank you. Lene, we'll start with you. Oh.
Steve.
Oh, sorry. Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Okay, Bree, thank you.
Our-
In 2008, the Legacy Amendment passed with 55.96% of the vote, if I remember properly. Certainly it passed. There was a lot of Minnesotans who really wondered about that, and there's probably even more now as we see the use of these dollars not being used in the way that was intended. Our agencies are siphoning away these dollars as the mechanism by which they are deployed. In the Constitution, it was a constitutional amendment. The Constitution requires that these dollars be spent on clean water efforts. They are being funneled through agencies. The agencies are siphoning those dollars up, hiring more bureaucrats, and less of the money is getting out to the land where it needs to get to. I would offer a different approach, and I've been talking to a lot of the farm groups and the soil and water districts about changing the whole system to one that offers block grants directly to the counties for the soil and water districts that already have that mechanism in place to use to actually make successful changes.
Thank you, Steve, and I apologize for almost skipping you. Now we'll start with Lene on the next question. What can the state do to help the city of Winona and county regulate the frac sand industries? For instance, some operations have no limits on the number of trucks.
Right. With frac sanding, I think there needs to be a conversation that happens between anybody involved within government. I'm not taking one side, and I think it's a local issue more than a state issue, and the state shouldn't have a big say. It is up to the communities here to make choices and talk with the businesses that are coming in to do the mining and speak to how are they going to help with roads if their trucks are creating damages and those things. I think it needs to be a conversation from both sides.
Thank you. Jean?
This has been primarily a local issue with both the cities and the counties responsible, and you've seen them react all the way up and down the corridor here from Wabasha all the way through Houston. And I support the local control. I think that's the best place to have the discussion and also to have the results. Now, they have come to us and said there are limits, and within these limits, we need help. Some of that help you see here. There's an air monitor that was installed here in Winona as a result of state legislation. So I think you've got two things going on. One is, to the extent the local units of government can handle it, fine. But when they come to us and say, we can no longer handle it, for instance, air monitoring or other things, and the trucks would be another example, then I think we're going to have to step in as a state and say, all right, they can't handle it, we're going to have to help them.
Thank you. Steve?
Well, Bree, we have essentially chased the frac sand industry out of Minnesota by delaying is what we have done here, and it's gone to Wisconsin and other states. I don't know if it's going to come back. And I think it's instructive when we, as a state, place ourselves out as an island that has regulations that are higher than any other state around us, and then we grow those regulations even higher. What we find is that businesses are chased, they leave our state. This is one example in addition to all the taxes that happened last session. We saw what happened there. But we're seeing now with last year's legislation, new trout streams, new designated trout streams being developed around that. I dropped onto the governor's desk 4 inches of regulations that our local counties had developed through good processes. We need to respect those and let our local units of government operate within what they've successfully framed out.
Thank you. Mark?
I agree on the local government control. And if a frac sand industry has gone to Wisconsin, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Silicosis is a big issue. Diesel particulates are a big issue. But the biggest issue is the truck traffic. Each truck pounds the road more than 10,000 cars. Wheelage tax, was it fair to the trucker to pay a wheelage tax? No, the taxpayer pays it at the pump when we have to fix a road. And these high traffic areas, in some cases 300 trucks rolling down the road, is a hazard if it's in a school area. If it's in the country, I don't have so much of a problem with it, as long as they're tarped and they're not putting sand on the road. As the traffic goes up and down the road, it pounds this sand into the minute micron particles, which is the cancer-causing issue with silica sand. It's different than the sand we use for fill in buildings. Thank you.
Thank you. Jean, we'll start with you on the next question, please. How can the legislature support law enforcement in the halting of human trafficking in Minnesota?
We've already seen that there's been legislation that has been introduced, and we're looking at how we can deal with an issue that really crosses state lines. And the minute it crosses state lines, it's a commerce issue and it's dealt with by the federal government. So our best line of support here is to ensure that all of our local units of government, particularly those that are on a border like Wisconsin, have all the resources they need to be able to intercept and detain any of the trafficking that goes on here. And that means there has to be an increase in law enforcement, particularly in areas where there are border communities like Winona.
Thank you. Steve?
Well, Bree, one of the things we need to do is look at helping identify. A lot of these human trafficking situations are accompanied by people who may not even be in our country legally. And I think what we're seeing here is a response to our porous borders. We hear that discussion not only in committee when we're talking about this issue, and we've had several bills over the last several years that have addressed this. Some of them have passed into law, and I know there's still more work to do. But one of the things I think we have to be conscious of, our failure to enforce federal immigration laws have contributed to the problem we have in front of us. We need to address that federally, and then we need to properly equip and train our law enforcement in how to work around the problems that they see in that particular area.
Thank you. Mark?
Well, this is an issue that the public needs to step up to the plate on. If you have any suspicions at all, such an activity is going on, 911 it. We need to have adequate law enforcement as well as adequate attorneys to prosecute these people. This, along with any crime with a knife or a gun, should be a life imprisonment as far as I'm concerned. You just don't do this in our country. We're beyond slavery. And to treat people like they're animals or livestock, I mean, even livestock on the small farms get treated better than some of these folks do that are being trafficked. And it's just a public concern where the public needs to step up and help law enforcement end this. Thank you.
Thank you. Lene?
This is obviously an issue that we've faced not only as a state, but as a country and as a global community, for sure. And so I think it goes beyond what the state can just do for law enforcement. We've seen congressmen such as Eric Paulson introduce bills on the federal level to help stop sex trafficking going on, and I think we need to continue to support legislators and the enforcement find. Going along with Steve, I definitely think immigration has a play in this, and to look into those things.
Thank you. I just wanted to take a moment now and remind people at home to use the call-in phone number for questions if they have them, 457-8280. And our next question will start with Steve. Share your views on MinCare and healthcare in Minnesota.
I think you meant MNsure.
MNsure. Yeah, well.
MNsure.
Yes, MNsure. Thank you.
Okay, MNsure is Minnesota's form of Obamacare. It's included the takeover of 1/6 of our economy. And what we have seen is a full 200% increase in premiums over the last year for women in southeast Minnesota. And men, these are women and men who pay for their insurance, have seen a full 180 to 200% increase, and now we are seeing the preferred one, the provider or insurer, excuse me, that had 60% of the people in MNsure, 60% of the coverages dropped out because they cannot participate with all the mandates. Those 60% of those people are going to see in the next year another 63% increase in their premiums. The government takeover of healthcare is not working. We need to go a different direction.
Thank you, Steve. Mark?
Thanks, Bree. The Affordable Care Act polls in the positive numbers. Obamacare polls in the negative numbers. It's what the Republicans do. They demonize a project they don't like. It's the same thing. MNsure is part of the Affordable Care Act. Again, we've already got free health care. It's called the emergency room. The Democrats are trying to be grown-ups in the room. They're trying to do something about this, trying to reduce costs of the emergency room and the burden on our hospitals so they can take care of patients that really, truly need care. Now, the Catholic Conference worked tirelessly to get behind MNsure, and I stand 100% with the Catholic Conference and the charities that all the work they've done to try and get a little bit of affordable health care. Insurance rates have gone up every year 10%, if not 20%, without the Affordable Care Act. You just can't blame that on that. You can blame it on cancer. That's the problem in this planet. Cancer is rampant.
Thank you, Mark. Lene?
With MNsure, I think we need to go back into it and check and make sure that we have experts working within it. I would love to see it repealed on the federal level with Obamacare, but I cannot control that on the state level. Within us, I think we have to work to make it the best that we can and deal with it as such, whether that's on the board of executives, making sure they're not getting unfunded or getting bonuses that maybe they don't deserve, and or using tax vendor monies towards that. I think that's basically my thoughts.
Thank you. Jean?
Senator Miller and I met with insurance agents this summer in Winona, and we reviewed MNsure and also the Affordable Care Act. One of the most startling statements from them was they thought when this would happen, they'd lose 30 to 40% of their business. They lost 2% of their business. And while they have strong reservations about the Affordable Care Act at the federal level, they think that at least the MNsure side of it works and works much better. Now, our neighbor, Wisconsin, swallowed the Affordable Care Act whole and did nothing. And that was a total disaster for them. We have MNsure. We have insured hundreds of thousands of people who did not have insurance, and we have made sure that there is a place to go for those people who are selling insurance. So it's a federal law. You have a choice. The choice is either take the federal law raw, and then you're going to have a one-size-fits-all, or do what we did in Minnesota. And usually what we do in Minnesota tends to work.
Thank you. Mark, we'll start with you. Currently, the taxes are some of the highest in the country for businesses, and some have moved away. What will you do to create a friendly tax environment for business owners in Minnesota?
Thank you, Bree. Minnesota has one of the greatest workforces in the nation. When a Minnesota resident goes out state, and I've heard stories from nearly every state, they're almost welcomed with open arms by other businesses in other states because they know the Minnesota work ethic. We do our job, we get it done, we don't leave until we get our work done. It's one of the greatest ethics in the entire planet is the Minnesota workforce. That's why we have so many Fortune 500 companies. Personally, I'd like to see any corporation that stays in the United States be traded in red, white, and blue and have the American flag by it rather than flee our country during a time of need when troops are coming home in body bags. To abandon our troops for cheaper taxes doesn't sit well with this farmer.
Thank you. Lene?
I think this is part of my opening statement. I had said that the business community was becoming hostile towards businesses, and this is part of it is taxes. So I'd like to see some of those pulled away from businesses and a little bit easier lighten the load on our business community with the taxes they put in to make it a little bit friendlier to businesses coming in, and along with that deregulation of some of the business communities.
Thank you. Jean?
I'm endorsed by the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, one of only 3 Democrats, and the Minnesota retailers. In February, we repealed about $270 million in the so-called business-to-business taxes. We did it in 4 weeks, and we did it because of the business community and what they said were taxes that were inappropriately passed in 2013. Having said that, the rhetoric that you hear about businesses leaving the state isn't true. We outstrip everybody on job growth except for North Dakota. Wisconsin is 42nd. We're 5th. So if you're looking at a state that's working, we're working. This idea that businesses are fleeing isn't true. We have had businesses come to Minnesota and expand in Minnesota over the last few years for exactly the things Mark talked about. And they're continuing to do it because we're making investments in human capital. So for once, let's not deal in rhetoric. Let's deal in fact. I'll work with the Chamber and I'll work with the realtors because I think you need to work with everyone. But frankly, you also need to work with facts.
Thank you. Steve?
Yes, the Democrats did pass huge tax increases 2 years ago. $9.4 billion increase in spending, $2.4 billion increases in taxes and fees. Then they turned around a year later when they realized that the public was upset with them and they repealed a portion of them. About a fourth of them were repealed. Now, that's not repealing taxes. That's undoing the mistake that you did on the people of Minnesota. And we've got more of the mistake that's still out there that needs to be repealed. We need to start out with a statewide business property tax, which is when Republicans were in control. Representative Davids was the chair of the committee. We repealed it, and Governor Dayton vetoed that bill. We need to scale back the taxes from the statewide business property tax. The corporate franchise tax is the 3rd highest in the world. We need to go a different direction so we grow the private sector instead of government.
Thank you, Steve. Lene, we'll start with you on the next question. What can Minnesota do to reduce sexual and domestic violence?
This is actually a topic pretty close to my heart as an advocate for victims of abuse. Thinking actually before this forum and what that question could possibly be, I think it needs to be a conversation that goes on in the communities more than anything through the government. It needs to be a conversation that Winona is very good at having. Winona sees it within their university at Winona State. They see it within the Women's Resource Center, and they see it just within the townspeople themselves. And in order to really combat any sort of abuse, it needs to be a conversation between community members and holding one another accountable in their actions.
Thank you. Jean?
My cousin Becky Poplinski passed away yesterday about 1 o'clock in the morning. She worked at the Women's Resource Center as a receptionist. So I'm very familiar with the work of the Women's Resource Center and what they do and where the funding comes from. And it comes from a number of places, not just the state. It comes from the federal. It comes from local donations. That entire building was a local donation. You've seen Minnesota step up on every level, private and public, to ensure that we don't allow domestic violence. zero tolerance in this state. And I think that's commendable, and it's got to be continued.
Thank you. Steve?
Well, we have to make certain that the counseling options that are out there for families are known to those families when they're in situations that are that provide the type of environment that breeds domestic violence. We need to strengthen our economy. A stronger economy will help decrease the stress on families. And so what you're seeing here is a result, if you're talking about domestic violence, a result of family stress. So we need to remove the stressors of families, which can be economic stressors. We have grown the government over and over again at the expense of families. We need to go the other direction so that the government lives within its means, so families can keep more of what they earn, their stress will be reduced, and help these families be stronger. That will help us decrease domestic violence in Minnesota.
Thank you, Steve. Mark?
Well, my wife is an ethics attorney, and trust me, the prosecution never rests. I hear about this all the time. The bully law may help, hopefully. I'd rather see a lot more counselors in our schools than policemen. I'd rather see our kids taken up in an airplane in 7th grade and showed how to get high the right way, and maybe hang out at an airport and sweep the floor for some free airtime. As far as domestic violence, there's just no room for it. Turn the other cheek, well, does that work? Adrian Peterson, a monster of a man with a switch. I think the day has come where the NFL has highlighted this to the point that perhaps the people who are most egregious with domestic violence can take a look at society and maybe move on past violence.
Thank you. Jean, we'll start with you. Beyond the bridge and current Winona road construction, what are other transportation issues that need to be addressed?
There is a large stamp in the Winona County Historical Society of the sesquicentennial stamp of the state of Minnesota. It has the Winona Bridge on it. That bridge was presented, that stamp, by Governor Pawlenty when we were one of the 5 cities that was capital for a day. Governor Pawlenty vetoed the transportation bill. We had to override his veto. We did so with bipartisan support. As a result of that override, 2 weeks later, that bridge was closed, and it was closed for almost 3 weeks. And we found out the hard way what happens when you close a major artery. Had we not overridden Governor Pawlenty's veto, there would not have been the money to repair that bridge. The Minnesota Chamber of Commerce supported the extra tax money. The Minnesota Business Partnership did. And to answer your question, if you want more investment in transportation, the business community, as it did then, is going to have to stand up and say, we need an increase in funding in transportation, and the best way to do that is through the gas tax because it's dedicated.
Thank you, Jean. Steve?
Well, first of all, three points. First of all, we need to increase the efficiencies within MnDOT. There was a bill passed last session that required MnDOT to find, I believe it was 15% efficiencies and then make that money available. Let's use that money then for roads and bridges instead of waste. Secondly, our agency needs to set priorities. We are seeing mission creep within MnDOT that is going out and proposing light rail trains all around every spoke of the city, the Twin Cities. They've got bike trail coordinators in each county of the state building out bike trail systems with our roads and bridge money. We need to bring back priorities and focus it on roads and bridges instead of things that they weren't intended to. Lastly, bonding. The bonding process, if we can marshal the ability to bring forward a bonding bill that focuses on transportation instead of all kinds of goodies for Minneapolis, St. Paul, and every other city around the state that we don't need, we can focus on our roads and bridges. I wrote a bill last year that did that, and we can do it again.
Thank you, Steve. Mark?
Yes, our roads and bridges are being stressed by these mega rainfalls. Over the last 30 years, what was an average of 4 to 6 for a mega rainfall is now 8 to 12 inches. We had 19 inches down here by La Crescent that flooded Rushford. We've had all our major river valleys flood in the last 7, 8 years. Our bridges are being stressed and washed. They're aged. Our ag economy is bringing heavier and heavier equipment over these rural bridges. They all need upgrading. Representative Queasley, who's running for lieutenant governor, actually said with a 2-cent gas tax increase that the Democrats should be taken out back and shot. Now, what kind of civility is that for a 2-cent gas increase? I would put 10% more ethanol. That would drop the price at the pump by 10 cents. There would be no harm at the pump.
Thank you.
And increase the tax.
Thank you, Mark. Lene?
I definitely think we have to look at our priorities within transportation spending. We have to make sure that, like Steve said, it was a 15% efficiency, and we have to make sure that those are, that's a 15% efficiency within transportation itself, non-related to the construction. And so those efficiencies need to be funneled back into creating infrastructure, roads and bridges, and doing those things, and making sure that we aren't spending frivolously on different things such as the light rail, when really we need our roads and bridges in order for businesses to continue to grow across the state.
Thank you. And the next question, we'll start with Steve. What is your stance on equal rights and treatment of same-sex partners versus married couples?
You know, I was and still am an opponent of the same-sex marriage bill, if that's what the question is. But the question, can you read it again, Bree?
Yeah, let me read it again. What is your stance on equal rights and treatment of same-sex partners / married couples?
Yeah, that's a different issue. And I think probably most legislators would suggest, and I certainly do too, that regardless of sexual orientation, that everybody should be treated equally under the law. But as I mentioned, I was an opponent of the same-sex marriage bill. Still am regretful that we passed it, and I believe that our future will prove out that it was a decision we should not have made.
Mark?
To be short and brief, I think we should let them suffer like the rest of us married people. 3 parts per million atrazine has turned male frogs into female frogs. I see same-sex folks as more victims than choices. And all victims need to be treated with compassion. And if they get married and they're committed to each other, more power to them. AIDS is cut back in this country because of what? Some dedicated relationships. AIDS is transmitted the same way Ebola is transmitted. Now we got a new issue to deal with, and it's almost an immortal viral virus. Ebola is so hard to stop. It just turns your systems and all your organs to mush within days.
Thank you. Lene?
I agree with Steve that this isn't about same-sex marriage per se, but the equal treatment of everyone under the law, and I would have to agree with the statement that everyone should be treated underneath the law by the same rules, and that's pretty much all I'm going to say on that.
Thank you. Jean?
I had chaired the Winona Human Rights Commission before I came into the legislature. We dealt with a number of issues that were both in the city and government dealing with how individuals are treated. And the one thing I learned was, if you discriminate against anyone, you discriminate against everyone. There should be no discrimination. Period. It should not be allowed.
Thank you. Mark, we'll start with you on this one. And this is going to be our last question in the forum question answer section. How does the legislature justify secondary foundation aid being used to support post-secondary institutions? And basically, in parentheses, some people feel that post-secondary education opportunities seem to be abused.
Well, I'd like to know more about the abuse. All I know is a lot of our schools are so old that they're spending tens of thousands of dollars to hire Ecolab to come and catch the rodents in our schools. And that goes all the way through the school system, through our college system. We need to keep our buildings safe and sanitary, and if there's any issues pertaining to that, I would probably defer to experts like Gene on that, as my arena of expertise is guitars, aircraft, and combines. Thank you.
Lene,
Bree, will you repeat the question, please?
I will do so. How does the legislature justify secondary foundation aid being used to support post-secondary institution? And in parentheses, some people feel post-secondary education opportunities seem to be abused in some cases.
Right. I can't speak to the abuse from the secondary education for the state for that, but I can speak to PSEO and its options. Post-secondary enrollment options is a program through the state of Minnesota that allows juniors and seniors in high school to attend colleges using the tax dollars that would be dedicated to them as a student in the high schools and going into the colleges. Being a student that did post-secondary enrollment options, I think it should be expanded as an option for college students and high school students to continue to help lower their college debt.
Thank you. Jean?
The intent of post-secondary options was that you had certain students who could no longer, they didn't have a math class or a language class or some other class at the high school level, so then they went to a college and got it. That was the original intent. That intent, however, has blown away with what's happened with tuition and debt. There is an abuse, and the abuse is extensive. We have both private and public secondary schools who are dominated by high school students. The percentage of students attending these institutions now goes up to 50% in some areas. It's an issue that we'll be looking at in 2015 because, frankly, this is one of the things that we can't afford to do in this fashion. It is unfair for a student to get 2 years of college free and for another student to go into college and then carry 10 years of debt. That simply can't happen. We have to go back to the original intent of post-secondary options.
Thank you, Jean. Steve?
Well, I agree with Lene. I think she hit it on the head. It seems the question is really focused around institutions, and I think this is fundamental to how we deal with education. Traditionally, we have looked at institutions, buildings, and the people, the adults in the buildings and the buildings. We need to focus on the kids. And that's what PSEO attempts to do, to provide more options for students to move in a way with more alacrity through the system, in a way that garners them a greater education at a faster pace. We need to embrace a PSEO. Maybe we need to change it in order to make it accommodate better for kids. Homeschooling, charter schools, other options. We've got a 50% dropout rate in many of our Minneapolis and St. Paul schools. Our current system is failing us. It is failing a lot of kids, and I think many of us look at that as a civil rights issue. We need to focus again on the little ones in the school, not the adults.
Thank you. And we're near the end of our forum, and we're going to ask that each of the candidates take 1 minute and offer a closing statement. And we're going to start with Steve for this. Steve, you have 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Bree. Thank you, League of Women Voters, for sponsoring this tonight. AAUW, I think they are part of the sponsorship too, possibly. This has been a great opportunity for us to discuss the issues and to hear from Republicans and Democrats different ideas around the same issues. We have seen over the last 2 years government grow larger, and at their expense, the people have grown smaller. We need to turn that around. We need to halt the growth of government, allow families and businesses to recover and grow again. People of Winona County, people of Minnesota, you have an opportunity to make a difference on November 4th. Bring a change forward that'll change the direction, make your family and business stronger. So please get out and vote and make that difference.
Thank you. Mark, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, and thank you to the League for inviting me down. There's a compassion deficit in this country, and there's a great compassion deficit in the Republican Party, except for the godless corporations who have no allegiance to the American flag. This bothers me to no end. As a farmer, I don't get paid until I get the job done. That's the Minnesota work ethic. I've farmed my entire life. I plan to farm until I die. I look forward to serving Minnesota as a servant, as a steward of the soil, of the air, and the water. Minnesota is the headwaters of North America. Our waters flow north, east, south, and west. If we don't keep them clean, who else will? They drink out of the Mississippi all the way to New Orleans. It's our job to make sure that water is as clean as possible. If we don't do it, no one else should either.
Thank you. Lene?
Thank you, Bree. Thank you for inviting us down, and thank you for hosting and moderating this today. Thank you to the League for having us, and the AAW, as long as Steve said, and the audience for coming out tonight. I know it's been long. I just want to say that I appreciate everyone's support, and that I hope you go out and vote on November 4th.
Thank you. Jean, 1 minute.
I'm a fourth-generation Winonan. 3 generations of my family have degrees from Winona State. At least 2 generations are buried in each of the cemeteries on the other side of the lakes, and with Becky tomorrow, that'll be 3 generations. My 92-year-old father's watching this, and my 6-year-old grandson. This is all about them. It's all about representing what has happened in this community and what's going to happen in the future. And that's why I'm serving in the Minnesota House of Representatives. So I can be sure that both my father, who's in assisted living, and my grandson, who now is in 1st grade, gets the very best of what they deserve from Minnesota.
Thank you, and thank all of you for participating in the forum tonight. We'd also like to thank our co-sponsors, AAUW, the Women's Resource Center of Winona, and Winona State University American Democracy Project. We would also like to thank HBC for taping this educational forum. Selected candidate forums will be rebroadcasted on government access channels, Charter Cable Channel 987 and HBC Channel 19. Check your local media for dates and times of the rebroadcast. We would also like to share with you that tomorrow, October 22nd, there will be a meet and greet of local unopposed candidates. Those candidate offices are the Winona County Attorney, Winona County Recorder, Soil and Water Conservation District Board, District 1, Winona Area Public School Board Districts 1 and 2, and the Winona City Council at large. This event will feature televised candidate statements and time for the public to present and directly meet the candidates after the televised portion is over. This final League of Women Voter General Election Forum will be held in the Winona City Hall chambers, and it will begin at 7 p.m. Through the courtesy of the Winona City Clerk, we rebroadcast the 2014 forums on those local government access channels, again HBC 19 and Charter 987. The rebroadcast dates for this particular forum, which includes the Minnesota Legislature House Districts 28A and 21B, will be Monday, October 27th at 7 p.m. and Tuesday, October 28th at 9 a.m. If you need information about becoming a registered voter, please call the Winona County Auditor or the Winona City Clerk. Registration for online registration or by mail with the Minnesota Secretary of State office closed on October 14th. Minnesota is registration at the polls, so check the Minnesota Secretary of State's website for the process to do so. There are several items of identification that must be provided on the election day to election judges if you are not registered. The MNLWV.org website is a website that you may use for general voter service information. And just a reminder to please vote in the general election on November 4th. The polls are open from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. And thank you all in our audience, and again our candidates, for joining us tonight, and have a great evening.